Good morning. Welcome to the opening ceremony of this seminar, All the New Perspectives about Development, the International Agenda and Sustainable Development Goals. For this opening ceremony, we will have the participation of the three co-hosting organizations. We have Julio Santaella, President of the National Institute of Statistics. We also have the presence of the representatives from the World Bank, and we also have myself as representative of Colegio de México. So, without further ado, I yield the floor to Julio Santaella. Thank you very much, Silvia. I particularly thank the President of Colegio de México, Silvia Giorguli, for the close cooperation we have entered into for hosting this event. Additionally, thanks to Carlos Silva Jáuregui, who is responsible for international practices in order to address issues related to poverty as part of the World Bank staff. Sometimes these issues are topics that are seen in the long run. We are 15 years away from our next objectives, and our point right now is not to forget that these are long-term goals. We need to remember the long-term perspectives as part of our daily actions. And in this regard, it's important not to miss out on these issues, because what we are looking with regards to the Sustainable Development Goals for 2030 is very complex for a variety of reasons. There are very positive aspects such as an inclusive and universal agenda. You may remember the idea of no one left behind, and no one really means no one. No one here, no one out there, no one that will be present in this world in the upcoming years. So that's what we need to take into consideration. That is why this international agenda convenes the international society to address the issues of the world population from a sustainable perspective. This is a way we can address issues related to public policies, specifically in terms of the environmental development as well as social development. And in order to develop public policies, we need evidence. And evidence derives from statistical and geographic information that will define the baseline, that will define the progress of this agenda. Additionally, we need to monitor how progress is performed. So in order to give a follow-up to the progress of the 2030 agenda, we need to face very important challenges, particularly for the offices regarding statistical analysis. We have a very big responsibility because we need to process information. That in itself is a huge responsibility. But we are also the coordinators of the National Statistical Information System in each one of our communities. The National Institute of Statistics is not the single entity responsible for the management of statistical information. It is only one of the multiple offices in that regard. And a lot of information comes from a variety of government agencies. That is why the National Institute of Statistics, INEGI, for its acronym in Spanish, needs to be able to draft a report about this information, and we also need benefit of the Sustainable Development Goals. In order to define the indicators, we need for the indicators to be simple enough, but at the same time, the indicators are quite complex. in the international arena. Some indicators are associated to particular agendas of different international organizations or civil society organizations in Mexico, perhaps NGOs. That is why all of us need to work in a coordinated way. Perhaps you may remember that the Sustainable Development Goals are 17. And in order for us to follow up on the progress, we have 230 sub-indicators. So these sub-indicators will continue to increase, and we can group them into 3 categories, 3 levels, depending on the level of maturity for their implementation and follow-up. Only 80 out of these 230 Tier 1 indicators are produced in a regular way. That means that it is only 1/3 of the total sum of indicators. So additionally, we have a Tier 2 indicators. These are the ones that have a clear methodologies and definitions, which are commonly accepted, but they are not often used. These 60 indicators will be prone to common replication in the near future. However, we have still 90 indicators, that is approximately 1/3 of the indicators for which we do not have a clear methodology and they are not used in practice in a common way. So, a year has already passed and we have yet to define what these 90 indicators are and how we are going to handle them. So, on the one hand, for these last indicators, we need the leadership from the National Institutes of Statistics, as well as a close follow-up from international organizations, from the academia, and from government entities. And that is the objective of events of this sort. You might imagine that abiding by this agenda implies a more robust technical experience from individuals, from government authorities represented herein. I was talking to Jose Martinez Udervil about the challenge of not leaving anyone behind. In order to do that, we need for the 2,500 municipalities in Mexico to be able to follow up on these agendas. So that is why we need to reinforce the technical capabilities of our authorities, and in order to do that, we need strategic coordination with the academia, with government agencies, entities, international organizations, as well as civil society organizations, in order for information to be properly used. In this regard, we are organizing this seminar, New and Old Perspectives about Development. The title in itself is provocative, and we are asking a question about development. And it is proper to ask a question about development in the academic arena, because we need to advance and to further knowledge from universities as well as educational centers, and that's what we expect to do during these 2-day seminar. There will be important reflections regarding the different sustainable development goals, and there will also be heated discussions about core issues such as how development is understood as a universal and global topic. But then we need to ask ourselves whether these 230 indicators provide a comprehensive and universal perspective about development, and we also need to analyze whether we need to work on different areas. We will have talks from experts from international organizations as well as experts in statistical and geographical information. Thank you beforehand for your participation and for sharing your ideas with us. And to the participants, thank you very much for coming, and I invite you to harness this seminar as much as possible and have a good day. Thank you. Now I yield the floor to Dr. Carlos Silva Jáuregui from the World Bank. Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be back here in Colegio de México. A couple of months ago, Colegio de México, INEGI, as well as the World Bank organized another event in this same space. And in that occasion, we discussed the big issue of big data. It's a pleasure to be here during the opening ceremony of this seminar, and it's a pleasure to be collaborating with Silvia from COLMEX as well as with Julio from INEGI in a topic as relevant as this one. As Julio said, during the following 2 days, we will be reflecting upon the new and old perspectives about development, with a particular interest in the international agenda as well as the SDGs and the 2030 agenda. This agenda is very important for a variety of reasons. From the perspective of the World Bank, this agenda is very closely related to our goals and our interests. The World Bank has defined 2 interests that are of utmost importance. We defined them 3 years ago, and we call them the twin goals, which include the eradication of extreme poverty, defined as a 3% reduction in extreme poverty throughout the world. And this is closely related to one of the 17 SDGs. Additionally, we seek to share prosperity, which we are doing by measuring how wealth is distributed along or among the 40% lower sector of the population. This is strictly related to SDG number 10. However, the World Bank also organizes a variety of activities that are closely related to the other 17 SDGs in terms of water, transportation, etc. The agenda is very important because nowadays approximately 10% of the world population lives in extreme poverty conditions. This implies approximately 700 million people. This is absolutely unacceptable, and it is something that countries as a whole, the private sector, international organizations, need to address in a joint effort in order to eliminate this issue. The Sustainable Development Goals are an essential aspect in order for these agendas to be properly channeled, in order for us to attain the objectives in terms of equality. Our objectives into the future are not something that will remain within the limits of our own borders. Some of them go beyond our own geographical limitations, for instance, the eradication of pandemics. It's essential to eradicate pandemics in order for them to not to cause the harm that they do. And we understand that these pandemics imply a huge difficulty for countries in ways of development. So all the activities that we are organizing help us focus on the attainment of the objectives of the 2030 agenda. Currently, the World Bank works with international organizations, with the private sector, with non-government organizations in order to move forward in the 2030 agenda. There are 3 aspects in particular that will be particularly useful to attain the objectives of the agenda for 2030. One of the ones that was mentioned by Julio was the need to have more and more reliable data. This is very important for a variety of reasons. It's not only a matter of collecting information just for the sake of it, but it will allow academics to understand better what is happening. Additionally, better information creates better coordinating efforts. It enables the possibility of implementing more efficient public policies and to actually make a change. This is particularly relevant not because we need them to attain the SDGs, but it is also a matter of addressing the issue that we still are very far behind in the quality of the data in many countries. Allow me to underscore that the World Bank seeks to improve the quality as well as the frequency of the statistics that already exist. However, there are still approximately 76 countries, particularly in Africa and in Asia, where there is not the possibility to measure the population that lives in poverty. It's not possible to compare what is happening with poverty. This is only one example related to data collection, a process in which we have been working for the latest years. However, the amount of data necessary to attain the objectives of the 2030 Agenda will require a very robust data collection and analysis system. Having this information available allows countries to focus on areas where they need to pay closer attention. Another issue that is essential for us to be successful in the attainment of our objectives is to have a proper funding for the necessary reforms that seek overcoming the difficulties in countries in ways of development and which are pushing us back in the attainment of the SDGs. This is only one of the ways that we need in order to meet the SDGs. However, we see that perhaps the conditions will be harsher than we think. The importance of highlighting the relevance of funding implies that we also need to properly allocate the resources obtained from funding. This will be essential in order to meet our objectives towards 2030. This is a very challenging agenda. Maybe the word challenging is more concise. It summarizes what we need to face. Because, for instance, reducing poverty by 3% will require efforts and conditions that are hard to meet. However, the global movement seeking to decrease poverty has seen a lot of momentum in the last years. However, there are also risks related to the global economic deceleration. And as countries get closer to meeting these goals, and as they decrease poverty, the possibility of actually eradicating poverty becomes more complicated. Sometimes when poverty decreases, that means that there are very specific groups for whom specific public policies need to be developed and implemented. And this will be an effort that we will all have to address in order to meet our 2030 objectives. The other aspect that is critical is the proper implementation of public policies. Not all public policies are moving in the way that they should, and sometimes the regulatory frameworks are not modified as they should in order for policies to be more effective. Having these 17 objectives and having the information necessary to monitor the progress in this regard will allow countries to implement efficient public policies to meet this agenda into the future. I will summarize my initial comments because I think that it is more important for us to engage in the discussion panels. So without further ado, I want to thank Colegio de México for their hospitality and for hosting us in this event. Thank you very much for your presence in this forum, these 2 days of dialogue and reflection. Thank you very much to the National Institute of Statistics for the collaboration we have had not only for this event but for a lot of activities, and we cordially invite you to be actively participating during these 2 days for us to move forward in the implementation of this agenda, and hopefully by the end of this seminar we will all be satisfied by the talks, by the discussion that we engage in during this 2-day seminar. Thank you very much and welcome. Thank you very much, Carlos. To finish this opening ceremony, I welcome once again the World Bank as well as the National Institute of Statistics, as well as many other representatives from different government entities. I also see that we also have people from the National Autonomous University of Mexico. We have people from UN Women, from Flaxo, from civil society organizations, and I believe that this is very enriching because that's what we wanted with this event. We wanted to host an event where we could gather all these different stakeholders. For my opening remarks, I wanted to focus on 2 issues. The first one is why we are talking about this, why we are talking about it now. During some of the previous meetings with the people from the National Autonomous University was that right now we are not inventing the wheel. This is not a completely new topic, and we talked about measuring poverty, we talked about equality a couple of years back, and as years have passed, we have included perspectives such as the environmental perspective, the gender perspective, and there have also been new international instruments that seek the attainment of the Sustainable Development Goals. So when we were organizing this seminar, we said, well, in a broader perspective of what sustainable development is, where can we fit an exercise of this sort? This event is very important in order for us to meet the 2030 agenda, because something else that has happened was the way that the objectives were outlined and how consultation took place. And the consultation process was particularly interesting because there was a constant quest for the opinion of international organizations, government entities, as well as civil society. Additionally, this discussion brings together a lot of different perspectives, so we may have in one same forum a biologist at the same time that we have an expert in nutrition. So that in itself, bringing all these stakeholders together, is a challenge in itself. So we are asking a question about development, about the older perspectives towards development as well as the new ones. When we organized the seminar, we said, well, we need to move from the concepts to the actual operation, and operation is related to indicators, and operation is strictly related with the implementation of any mechanism necessary to attain the SDGs. And at present, the 230 indicators have been strictly related to the data collection, and in that sense, in Mexico, the National Institute of Statistics, the INEGI, has had a major role. We have also learned from the past in terms of the results from the Millennium Development Goals, and it would be false if we said that data collection by itself is automatically related to coordination and implementation of public policies and the 2030 agenda. That is why I think that the second aspect to be taken into consideration is that it's essential to bring together the discussion of concepts, the discussion about data, and we also need to think forward in terms of implementation. And implementation implies the coordination of a variety of transversal stakeholders that need to engage in dialogue. For example, in governmental terms, we need to bring together different actors who are not normally in close coordination with one another. So that is why we need to think beyond the indicators. And in order to close these remarks, I think that this seminar is the result of a very fruitful dialogue that we have engaged in with the World Bank as well as with INEGI. The first seminar we hosted in 2012 was related to data collection. Last year we were talking about population as well as the environment, and as Carlos said, we hosted another event about big data, which was an important topic in terms of SDGs. We needed to discuss alternative mechanisms to collect data for indicators. And in order to close my remarks, I want to tell you that this seminar is only one step in the long run of the attainment of the 2030 objectives. And what we need to do right now is not only to ask what we need to do about data collection, but we need to think about implementation. And in order to do this, during our last discussion panel, we will have the participation of different experts in environmental issues as well as implementation of public policies. And finally, I think that one of the most relevant issues is international cooperation towards development in the international context. And perhaps it will also be one of the lines of discussion of the seminar. Thank you very much for your presence.